This is Grafted Together with ACSI Chief Ministry Officer Jerry Nelson.
The late Scott Adams, renowned cartoonist and creator of the Dilbert comic strip, presents a thought-provoking perspective in his book titled How to Fail at Almost Everything and Still Win Big. Adams argues that goals alone are insufficient solutions to the challenges faced by individuals in achieving their aspirations. He employs strong language to describe individuals who set goals, suggesting that these individuals often lack the necessary systems to support their pursuit of those goals. The adage, the pathway to destruction is paved with good intentions, serves as a poignant reminder that merely having good intentions is not enough to guarantee success. If we view goals as mere intentions, it becomes evident that they may not be the sole determinants of achievement. And while I don't believe it's entirely inappropriate to set goals in educational settings, it's important to recognize that goals alone may not be sufficient for achieving desired outcomes. We have specific expectations for our graduates and the students we teach, envisioning their potential future selves if they truly apply the knowledge and skills we impart. However, these expected student outcomes may not be fully realized by the existing programs, curricula, or systems designed to support them. Similarly, we have goals and expectations for our teachers, just as we have programs, curricula, and support structures for our students. And it's crucial to examine how leaders are supporting those who are on the front lines of education, ensuring their success and fulfilling their roles. If teachers, coaches, and staff members are, in fact, on the front lines in education, what mechanisms are in place to enable them to perform their jobs with exceptional excellence? ACSI has identified systems thinking as one of the 35 constructs that contribute to a flourishing school. Systems thinking emphasizes the importance of considering the interconnectedness of various components when implementing changes within an educational system. And as leaders, we should consider this from a biblical perspective. How are we as leaders supporting our teachers? Today's classroom presents significant challenges for everyone involved. And while I personally don't believe the challenges of the past are vastly different, I do believe that the support systems are different, especially for the teaching profession. They may not be robust enough to support our teachers. Combined with the expectations to navigate a highly volatile and changing educational landscape, teachers may feel isolated and unsupported. And if this is, I believe, a stewardship issue, how can leaders support their teachers on the front lines, again, to ensure that they are equipped to support the students in the classroom? And perhaps this is ultimately a discipleship issue. I always believe it is. And perhaps this is really about the spiritual formation and supporting the spiritual formation of our teachers. And so if you are not a part of the Spiritual Formation Network, you are missing out on an opportunity to connect with leaders from around the world who are attempting to walk out this idea of loving one another and supporting each other and spurring each other on in the work that God has called them to do. So coming up on April 28th, we have Dr. Milton Gonzalez, Executive Director at Covenant Christian Academy in McAllen, Texas, who will join us to walk us through the last phase of our spiritual formation journey map, how to equip teachers and leaders in preparing for and responding to crisis. To register for the Spiritual Formation Network meeting, you can sign up at acsi.org/convene. That is acsi.org/CONVENE, and look for Spiritual Formation Network. Also, be sure to register for the Rooted Educator Worldview Summit being held June 15th through the 17th in conjunction with the Colson Center in Colorado Springs, Colorado, where we will explore the theme of biblical anthropology. And you can sign up today at acsi.org/rooted. Joining the podcast today is Nathan Stark, who is a 16-year educator with experience across both public and private education, having served as a classroom teacher, district trainer, PLC and team leader, county history fair coordinator, and as an assistant principal within Christian education. He is currently the founder of FolioBridge, an EdTech platform designed to help school leaders create clearer systems and processes that better support teachers. Nathan is also the author of Hidden Strength, Resiliency of the Sequoia, a work centered on leadership, perseverance, and growth through adversity. He has served as a praise and worship leader at City Church, St. Petersburg, and brings a faith rooted practitioner's perspective to conversations around leadership and school culture. Nathan is married and the proud father of three beautiful daughters. Nathan, welcome to the podcast.
Well, I appreciate you having me here this morning.
Yeah, man. Welcome to the podcast. Well, man, tell us about your journey. I mean, 16 years. I mean, that's a lot to cover in a short period of time, but tell us about your journey in education. Obviously, you served in the public sector, into Christian education, and now, starting your own EdTech company.
Yeah, so when I think about the past 16 years, I really think of it in kind of three different phases, right? My public school experience, private school and Christian education, and now what I'm doing with FolioBridge. And really everything starts with, I should have listened to mom. And then it also starts with failure, right? And what you talked about earlier in your monologue there. And so, graduated from Florida State University, but, my wife went to UF, she's a Gator. And as it turns out, Jerry, I'm coaching my daughter's flag football team, and we just got designated to be the Miami Hurricanes.
I was gonna say, man, I thank God we're Christians, man, because otherwise I think we might have a problem.
So I'm repping the Hurricanes for the next few weeks as the coach of my daughter's flag football team, right? So I graduated from FSU, and I was not an education major. Went out into the workforce, and all along my mom said, you should have gone into education, go into education. I was like, no, mom, no, I'm not going to do that. And then, I started to realize that, maybe this calling really is in education. And so I found that because my degree was in marketing, and that was something in Hillsborough County that you could teach, within the county because of that. And so they gave me the opportunity to actually teach a technology class out of everything. And so I came in January, and as you know, if you come in mid-year, that is a whole new kind of learning experience, right?
Absolutely.
And so the person who was in charge of technology for the county wanted me to come in and meet with me before school started. So I said, yeah, let's go. And so I remember sitting in his office, and he says to me, so the students come into class, what are your expectations and procedures for them? And I can't say with 100% certainty that my answer was exactly this, but it was something to the effect of, you mean they don't just sit there? Because my experience in education the past 4 or 5 years prior to that was college, right? You go to your lecture hall, the teacher lectures, and you take your notes, and that's it. I'd completely forgotten about life as a high school, middle school, and elementary school student. So he looks at me, he's like, oh boy, we got some work to do. So he sits me down and starts taking me through this process of like, well, when students come into class, what do they need to do? And so we put together really this system of, when students come in, they grab their 3-ring binder, they grab their textbook, they have a seat, they go in, and there's bell work that's already written on the board for them. And so you have these routines and these procedures for when students walk in the classroom. And so what I didn't realize at the time was he was teaching me how to create a system and a process in order to make my classroom run smoothly. Right. And so it was because of that I was able to take that technology program and grow it. And the principal decided to keep me on there. And I ended up getting into more American history and teaching civics. And, just found that, education and being a teacher was a huge passion of mine. And I enjoyed all the time that I had there in the classroom. And around 2015 is when I went and got my ed leadership degree. And, but that was also when we had our first child. And so, as you know, as an administrator, it takes a ton of time, and my wife, is working, and so I realized, well, I got my ed leadership degree, but I wasn't ready to actually utilize that within the public school system quite yet. But then around 2020, the position opened up at the private Christian school where my kids were attending, and so I said, I can be at the same place as my kids. Sign me up. So I'm
Mm.
able to make the performances and be part of the different, storybook parades, and I'm going to be
Yeah.
on campus. So that was created an opportunity for me to really get involved in Christian education, and that's where I really learned about
Mhm.
kingdom education, and really kind
Yeah.
of broadened my scope in there. And it was so that's how I got into Christian education, and I was a assistant principal for our upper school, which is 7th through 12th grade, and
Mhm.
I was there for 3 years doing that. And it started right in the summer of 2020, right? And we all know, kind of got thrown into thrown into the fire for that one. And but it was great learning experience, and I had tremendous leaders to learn from, who they were able to support and pour into me. And so that was really important in my growth and my journey there.
Mhm. And so how did that move into the ed tech company? How did where did that journey begin?
Yeah, so that's kind of phase three, right? So this is where the failure part of it comes in. And so it's really two stories that led me to where I'm at now. And one deals with post-it notes. So because, I was a public school teacher, I wanted to keep my certification. And so we have to have 120 hours every 5 years. And so the person in charge of keeping track of all that at my school says, hey, come to my office and submit your hours so I can submit them to our accreditation body to make sure we can maintain your certificate, because it ends in next year. So I went to her office and I noticed my name is on a post-it note with some other teachers' names. And I said, what's the deal with the post-it note on your computer? And she said, well, those are all the names of the teachers whose certificates are going to be expiring at the end of the year. And I have this just as a reminder to myself to send emails periodically, letting them know to submit their hours.
Mhm.
So I said to myself, you know, anything automated for that? We're keeping track of teacher certification, or you're keeping track of certification on a post-it note. It's like, that can't. And so, but it brought up a greater point in my head where I started thinking about, like, well, how am I doing things, as an assistant principal when I need to get, professional goals from teachers, or the beginning of the year, we've got that bloodborne pathogens video that everybody has to watch, right?
Yeah.
So I'm keeping track of that on an Excel spreadsheet and saying, all right, this person turned it in, this person turned it in. And as we get close to the dates, I would send those people periodically, emails, say, hey, make sure you turn this in. And so I find myself using up a lot of time just,
Mhm.
just to, keep track of who submitted things. And I was like, I don't have a really good workflow system in place that could make the most of my time. So that's really where the idea for FolioBridge got started. And then the next story deals with a teacher who taught ninth grade biology. Awesome teacher, been teaching ninth grade biology for 3 years, and she's the only ninth grade biology teacher at our school.
Mm.
She came to me and said, hey, is there another ninth grade biology teacher that you could connect me with, just so I know how they're teaching this? I've been teaching it the same way for the last 3 years, and I'm just curious to know how someone else does it. And I failed in this moment because I did not have a good answer for her. I was not able to support her and
Mm.
say, oh, yeah, you can just talk to this person at this school. I didn't have an easy connection other than just say, hey,
Yeah.
look up another Christian school and give them a call. And
Yeah.
so to me, that was a huge failure. And it was a big shift in, it was a big aha moment in my mind, because I did not experience that in public education, because one of the
Mhm.
schools I was at, we had 1,300 students, which
Mm.
meant there were 5 of us teaching
Yeah.
U.S.
Yeah.
history. So if I had a question about something, I could go right down the hall and say, hey, how are you teaching this?
Mhm.
My teachers did not have that opportunity, because we only had one teacher teaching per subject. And what I came to realize is that there are more and more Christian schools in that
Mhm.
same boat, where there is only one teacher teaching that subject, and they don't have the opportunity to connect with people at other sites who believe in kingdom education, right? Who are Christian
Yeah.
educators.
Yeah.
So really what FolioBridge is, it's that system where we are centralizing communication and resources within schools, but also within their networks. And this is something that Schools United has identified in South
Yeah.
Florida, that professional development, that Kevin Mackey has really been
Right.
championing, to create these peer networks of people, because he found the same problem. And so
Mhm.
what we're trying to do at FolioBridge is that same thing, to help facilitate these peer networks within Christian education, to help Christian education grow and become stronger schools.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. First of all, I want to respond to what you said about I don't know how many times I've heard the story of a parent who sends their kid to a Christian school getting recruited to to work and support. And I mean, I've heard that story so many times. So, Christian schools continue to be one of the greatest recruiters of talent through their parents. So want to
Right.
respond to that first. So, just it was wonderful. I love hearing those stories. But we talked about this important. You mentioned at the beginning of someone supporting you and helping you to put a system together. And as I mentioned at the beginning, this whole idea of systems thinking is one of the things that was identified in the Flourishing School culture research that contributes to a flourishing school. So let's put some definitions behind this. When you say systems thinking, or they were teaching you to put a system in place, what is that, and why is it important?
Yeah. So when I think of system, I think of structure, right? And then when I think of processes, I think of the steps that you have to take within that structure, right? So when
Hmm.
you think about, let's just think about in sports terms and in football, right? Maybe you're running a 4-3 defense, which means you've got four people on the line and then you've got three linebackers. That's your
Hmm.
system, right?
Hmm.
Other teams might do the reverse, right? They might run a
Hmm.
3-4, so three guys on the line and four linebackers, right? So when I think about that in terms of like my first year teaching, right? I had to create this structure. It was my system was how my room was set up to where when the students came through the door, the books that they needed to grab were right there, right? That
Hmm.
they were easily able to get to their seats. We had clear expectations. We literally rehearsed it on the first two days of school. It was literally line up outside, walk into the class, right?
Sound like first days of school.
Oh yeah, first days of school, man. You got to start with those setting those clear expectations
Yeah,
is huge because how do you know what to do unless you have those expectations in place at first, right? And
yeah.
so that was one of the things I realized, just as a leader and even as a parent, if my kid's not, doing what's expected of them, like cleaning out the car, right?
Hmm.
When they get out and then cleaning up their stuff. Well, that's something that I need to do as a parent
Hmm.
is to set up the expectation of no, like when you get out of the car, this is what you do. Like you clean up your stuff, right? You take these things out.
Hmm.
And so it translates into the classroom as well, where we're setting up these expectations of like when you these routines of when you come to the classroom, this is what you do. And so it's creating that structure and then there's a process behind it. And so when you expand that from just in the classroom and you think about systems leadership on a whole when you're running a school, it's how everything connects and you lead in a way that improves not just one part but everything as a whole. And what schools may not realize is that everybody has a system. It's just, is your system effective or not, right?
Yeah.
You
Hmm.
have a process in place, you have a system in place, but is that being communicated effectively? Is that being implemented? And
Right.
so when I think about schools on the whole, when I talk
Hmm.
about leadership and how everything connects, it's what is your process and what is your system for submitting attendance during first period, so that way we can call home to those kiddos who may
Yeah.
not be in attendance, because if they don't get marked absent the first within that first few periods, like we're not taking attendance properly, right? We need to make sure that's happening, right?
Yeah.
It's tardies, it's bathroom passes, it's what's your cell phone policy, it's what's your duty, it's making sure that dress code is enforced, how teachers submit for their time off, it's maintenance requests. So it's all these different systems that we have in place, and it's ability being able to really connect those to where everything's efficient, and it's not just one piece, but the whole school.
Yeah, I think you make such a good point that everybody does have a system. I mean, that's a part of how you survive. They may not recognize it as a system, but it's your way of getting goals. It's a way of getting things done. Even the way where we leave the house, or even when we come in the house. Do you take your shoes off at the door? Do you leave them on? Which door do you come through? All of those things. And I think it's also getting those. It's communicating those clear expectations for how we're going to do things within the school, but also, this is why that just came to my mind. It is getting, how do you even get people to kind of give up their own systems for the sake of the whole system? I feel
Right.
like that's one of the challenges within education, because especially when you have some of your newer hires coming in with your veterans, man, that seems to be a recipe sometimes for a lot of tension. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, I can't tell you how many times I heard the phrase, and maybe this resonates with you and some other people who are listening to this, but I can't tell you how many times I heard, well, when such and such was principal, this is how we did it. And
Mm,
that was two principles ago, right?
yeah,
So we've got some teachers doing things the way two principals ago. We've got some teachers doing things from the previous principal. And now we've kind of got to find our lane is, well, how are we doing things now? And what I found was that, a lot of these things, and I always kind of call it like this, it was more like oral history, right? Nothing was really written down, and nothing was really, there weren't we didn't have these expectations that were set in the beginning of the year. So everybody was kind of doing their own thing.
yeah,
So what I needed to do was, all right, how do we get everybody on the same page to know, like, this is how we do things now when it comes to just the simple stuff, right? Taking attendance, bathroom passes. What is the discipline policy? How do I enter in a behavior issue? Because I was the
yeah.
assistant principal, right? So I was the kind of that dean. So I needed to let people know, like, this is how you use, we used facts as our SIS.
Mhm.
So, this is how you enter into those behavior issues, and this is how you communicate it to me. So, really, that was set in the beginning of the year, to where I created this. I mean, I'm not kidding you. It was about a 70 slide PowerPoint. But what we did with it was each teacher in their subject area. So, like science, on the first day of school, you would take slides 3, 5, and 6, right?
Mhm.
And then social studies, you would take slides 7, 8, and 9. And on each of those slides were, how do it was really communicating to the students and to the teachers, this is our policy, and this is our
Right,
system for, for submitting attendance, this is our mission, right? This is what our mission
right,
means. This is our behavior, our discipline system, right? Because we
yeah,
use merits and things like that, and merits.
mhm,
So it's, if students are getting in trouble and they don't know what the majors and minors are,
yeah,
and they
uh-huh,
don't know how the discipline system works, then it becomes challenging for them to live up to those standards, because you've never really effectively communicated what they are.
yeah,
So
yeah,
it's, I think a lot of these things are just setting those expectations up in the beginning of the year.
yeah,
And that's kind of what we did with that big presentation, where every, subject area took like a certain section of what those procedures and what those systems were,
yeah.
so everybody would get on the same page.
Yeah, and it's brilliant in the sense that you're getting everyone to speak the same language. You're clear on your expectations. You're clear on how we're going to do things, the procedure. Because I what sets a Christian school apart from any other school? It's we want our kids to be formed in Christ, and so I look at even what you're saying as this helps us get organized and coordinated, so we are walking together towards our ultimate goal, which is these kids being formed in Christ, being shaped in His image, so that they can walk by the Spirit, they can become these ambassadors. And the teacher's responsibility in the classroom, and of course the leader's responsibility sitting above the teachers, not in a in a negative way, but just from a responsibility standpoint. I see this as just a stewardship thing, a stewardship issue. It's like, hey, listen, if we want to see our students and our teachers thrive, then we got to do our part as leaders to clear as many barriers to that as possible.
Absolutely. And I think you hit on two key things there that really stuck out to me. One, you said we need to walk together, right? And we
Hmm.
need to reduce the friction. So when creating these different, structures and systems, it is so huge as a leader to listen to your staff, because I've been at multiple schools from Title I, right, where we had
Hmm.
98% 80% of the students on free and reduced lunch.
Yeah.
And that school looked completely different than another school that I was at, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that only had about 30% free and reduced lunch. And so every school has its own kind of culture, and you have to listen to your
That's
teachers
good.
to put those systems in place. It can't just be coming in and saying, this is what it's going to be. No, no, no. Like, you have to get that buy-in and make the teachers part of that process.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so good. It reminded me of what Jesus said to his disciples. This is Mark chapter 10. This is right. Of course, I could imagine, man, Jesus probably heard a lot of like crazy talk. It's like listening to teenagers on a bus on a, overnight trip, man, just the nonsense that's coming out of their mouth. I'm sure that's how it was with Jesus and the disciples, but the times that that we have where it's been recorded that Jesus responded. One of these situations is when the disciples were arguing over who's the greatest, right? And Jesus hears the argument. He pulls them in. He says, "Listen, the Gentiles, those who the rulers, the way that you experience the world now, their whole thing is to rule over you." But he says, "Not so with you." He's like,
Yeah.
whoever wants to be the greatest needs to be is a servant, right? And whoever wants to be first must be last. And of course, then Mark 10:45, Jesus says, "For the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many." When I think about leadership or good leaders, it's not about putting the system over people to oppress them or to get their way. I look at what I hear you saying is like this whole idea of putting systems in place is the leader's responsibility to serve those that God has put in their care, in a way that Jesus would serve them.
Oh, absolutely, right. And so one of the things that we did is at the end of the year, I would get together with teachers, once a week over the, probably around, mid-April, and we would literally look at the student handbook, and we
Mhm.
would look at some of our procedures for things. And I got teachers, input on, well, hey,
Wow.
here's how we are doing tardies, right? And which specifically for first period, teachers felt that it was unfair that a student would get a demerit for first period tardies because we were a K through 12 school, and our 7th through 12th grade, our upper school, started 15 minutes earlier than the lower school. And so
Mhm.
we would have some of these families where they would have multiple students at the school, and ultimately some of the high school students would be late because younger brother or sister were running late. Or we're in
Mhm.
Tampa, these large urban areas where who knows what traffic's going to look like, right? So we still put in place that there was a consequence, for
Yeah.
an excessive amount of tardies, but for first period tardies specifically, there was no demerit associated with that, and that
Mm.
came from the feedback that we got from teachers, um, by saying we don't think that's fair. So we changed the handbook, procedure for that based on the feedback from the teachers. So I think that it's just we have to make those times to have those listening sessions, to get feedback from the teachers. Because if I want them to buy into and I want them to, really gain ownership in it, they have to be part of the conversation.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like it takes a level of vulnerability on the part of the leader to be able to have things criticized.
Oh, 1,000%. In some ways, like there are certain times where I had to really kind of steer the conversation and get it back on the rails a little bit,
Mhm.
but it's, it could very easily turn into kind of a venting session for sure.
Mhm.
But at the same time, yeah, you really do have to be comfortable with yourself and say, hey, I'm not perfect. I want to get it right. I'm a work in progress, and I want to improve, and I'm only going to do that if I listen, right,
Right.
to what you have to say, for sure.
Have you had any there's different types of requests that may come in, for changes to things. There are things that I'm sure as a leader, as you're listening to a teacher, they may say, you may perceive that as something that we can take care of really quickly. But how would you manage those things? I was like, man, that might be a multi-year type of a situation. I mean, how do you approach that? Because again, sometimes venting is a deep issue
Mhm.
that's coming to the surface. It's not, it's a frustration with something that folks feel like they've repeatedly brought to leadership's attention, but you may recognize that it's not a quick fix like, hey, let's, in the example that you gave in terms of the attendance. So how would you approach kind of like multi-year type of problems or challenges where the system needs to change, but the problem is a little bit more, no pun intended, systemic?
Yeah, absolutely. And so those are definitely some challenges where, yeah, you can't just make the change, over summer, and it happens right away. I think, just being open about it and let them know that, hey, I haven't forgotten about this,
Mhm.
and not we can't change everything, right? And so ultimately, as a leader, you listen to that feedback, process it, work through it, and not every you got to realize not everything is a good idea to begin
Yeah, yeah.
with. Not everything is going to be the best direction, but at the same time, like, people's voices are being heard, and you have to bring them into the conversation to let them know that, hey, like, I haven't forgotten you about this, um and although we're not able to make that particular change right
Yeah.
now, right? That might be something in the future, but I haven't forgotten about you, and I am
Mhm.
listening, to what you have to say.
Yeah.
And that is important, that you have the ability to speak that, right, and that you feel comfortable enough coming to me and
Mhm.
telling me about what your perspective is on that situation.
Yeah. What are you hearing from teachers and leaders about in terms of, because, one of the, my suspicion is that the, the crisis that we have with teachers and leaders, the shortage is related to this conversation. It is um, maybe not having the support that teachers and leaders both not having the support that they feel like they should, especially for a rapidly changing educational landscape where the demands seem to, it's not just adding up, but there's a compounding. But what are you hearing about what is it that teachers and leaders are wanting? What is it that they're needing? What are they desiring? So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the number one overarching thing that you hear all the time, it may not be number one, but you hear pay, right? So just the pay that goes along with it, and it's not necessarily the pay in terms of the amount, but it's matching the pay with the amount of work that's put in, right?
Yeah.
And so
Mhm.
that's kind of what I'm hearing a lot, and especially with our leaders, it's that 80-20 principle, right? Where 20% of your
Mhm.
people do
Mhm.
80% of the leadership and training. So
Right.
those people can get burnt out really easily. And so they're putting in all this time of being in charge of this club or being a subject area leader, but also having to train. And so that's one thing that you're hearing, and so that's why I think it's really important that that the mission of the school is really one of, like, front and center, so that people know this is why we're here, right? And that we don't also burn out our teachers by putting too much on them.
Yeah.
So that's one piece of it. And then I also think that I got a text. This was about 2 months ago, from a teacher, and she said, "Hey, can you write me a letter of recommendation? I'm leaving this such and such school." And I was like, "Okay, yeah, absolutely, 1,000%." So, but I got a little curious. I said, "Well, why are we leaving?" And so she said, well, one of the reasons was because of, it was a smaller school that she was at, and it was the work piece, right? Like, she was had to do so much stuff, and so she's like, I just want to go to a bigger school, to where I'm not going to be, asked to do so many things.
Yeah.
I said, okay. So, but then the other part that I heard was she says, well, the school I'm going to is better organized. I was like, oh,
Ah,
just though this school has a better process for just applying for the job, right? It's not just,
Yeah.
seeing, a job and filling out your application on a Word document and then, emailing it in. They actually have a system that's set up
Yeah.
where it's all online, and it's, you get a receipt that says thank you for your application being submitted, and there was kind of just that process behind it. And so yeah, so I think that, keeping teachers, at your school, I think processes and setting those expectations are huge from the get-go.
You know what? You're actually touching on something that, again, is just another thought. The larger you are at anything, systems are the things that you lean on, because that's how you manage large swaths of inventory. You manage just your data, your information, how you manage the people within your organization as well. So larger organizations, they have to be that way, and they probably got that big because they learn at certain, I would say, kind of thinking like an entrepreneur, at certain pain points, that you have to put structures in place in order for you to be able to move on to grow the other areas and put those systems in place, and then get the systems to talk to each other.
Yeah.
I just wonder if our smaller schools began to think along those lines in terms of systems, because what I'm hearing, and I want you to respond to this, is that the schools themselves need to take a hard look at their own school and put a system in place that works for their school within their particular context. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. That's it, right? So put these systems in place, and one of the things that we're seeing is a growth in Christian education. So you've got these schools that were, smaller. Maybe they had 100 students, but now they have 200 students. Or you've got the school that had 200 students, and now they've got 400 students, and so they're doubling in size, right?
Mhm.
But their systems and processes are the same from when they were smaller. And
Yeah.
so, they're still doing things on paper, and they haven't necessarily caught up yet. And so that puts a strain on, on people when you've got these
Mhm.
outdated systems and processes. And so, I was just thinking about, we have to be mindful, just even as an administrator, sometimes we do things unintentionally, and we end up having to create a new system for things. So there's a school where they went to those little magnet pouches for cell phones. They went
Uh-huh.
completely, no cell phones allowed. You just got to put them in those magnetic pouches. You've seen those.
Uh-huh.
And but here's the problem that they ran into: students would forget their magnetic pouch.
Uh,
So now what do we have to do? Well, I've got to go to the front office, and I've got to get a new pouch for the day. Well, that student doesn't return that pouch right at the end of the day. So now we've got to create a system to where, okay, what is our system going to be for, tracking that inventory, right?
yeah.
And so now they have to create an Excel spreadsheet where they list the student's name, and they basically charge them, $10 a day for
Mm.
that particular magnetic, pouch. And it goes up to 5 days, and after 5 days, you bought it, right?
Hmm.
But now I've got to have somebody keep track of all that, right? And then I've got to have that person send it to billing, so that billing can now charge that student's account. So you see how just something like, oh, okay, we're not gonna, we're going cell phone free. We're putting in things in these magnetic pouches.
Yeah.
Great. But now I've got to have a whole system to put in
Right.
place to, to track that and to bill it. And so they have to create a system for that. And
Hmm.
so who's gonna do that job now? Whose
Yeah.
role and responsibility is it to keep track of that? Because that wasn't their role and responsibility a year ago, but it is now.
Yeah. I wonder, Nathan, if that's a natural discipline of people to think through the implications of their decisions, because I would imagine that some of the greatest strategists in the world who's ever, I mean, I'm sure at Annapolis and West Point that this is pretty much what they're teaching, right?
Right.
It's asking the question, what's the worst that can happen by the decision that I make? And but if you think about it, it does produce some, it when you take the time to especially because resources are finite, right? Because as soon as when you are talking about The we're going to charge $10 a day. So
Mhm.
somebody had to write that policy. Then it needs to be sent to billing. And I was just like, you know what? If all of that has to happen, if this was the business world, we would say that's not adding up because we're after 10, if it costs $50, right? You're still not charging enough that accounts for everybody's time who has to touch that particular thing,
Mhm.
right? So I'm just curious, how do you even develop that type of discipline? It seems normal, or it seems like, yeah, leaders should do that, but it doesn't seem like it's a natural thing. What's the process for developing that systems type thinking?
Yeah, I mean, it's just, I think it's just thinking about, okay, if we implement this policy, what are we going to have to do to make this policy successful, right?
Mhm.
If we're going to put in this new dress code at our school, well, how are we going to keep track to make sure that this dress code is being implemented, that that is being tracked, right? So it's just being mindful of, okay, like if we are going to put this new system in place, who's going to be the person in charge of making sure that that this system gets put in place and that it's effective. Because if you're putting this new system in place and it falls apart, and then it's just going to lead to chaos, right? And it's going to lead to that idea that people aren't going to be happy with where they're at. It makes it feel unorganized.
But if the leader comes back and if a leader who's listening to this, Nathan, says, "Man, I don't know if I have time to do all of that stuff." Sometimes we just need to get things done. What's your response to that?
I mean, that's a great question. And for those leaders who are in that situation, like all of us, right, where time is definitely a struggle. I think you just gotta set aside time to talk to your people, right? And hey, it, we can't be afraid to fail, right? And maybe you put that system in place, but you got to go back and evaluate it, right? So that school
Mhm.
that that with their cell phone policy, all right, we're putting this process and this system in place. How efficient is this? Do we need to go back and do we need to tweak it? So, and it's being vulnerable enough to say this isn't working. We need to figure out a better way, and it's working with your
Mhm.
teachers in order to be able to do that. Don't put it all on yourself to figure out the solution. Talk to your people to figure out a better way, because they'll tell you, like, this isn't, I have an idea to how to make this work. And so, all right, cool, like, tell me what you think, right?
Yeah.
Because I don't always have the best solution, right? If we work
Mhm.
together, then we can figure out the solution.
Yeah, there's a book that was written. It's called The Wisdom of the Crowds. It's not a Christian book, but it's he's not exegeting any scripture, but I think he makes a really good point. He says sometimes we underestimate the wisdom of the crowd. And so in the case of our teachers and the people who work on the front lines, sometimes leaders can underestimate, what they can actually bring to the table, that they do have opinions, and they do have some good ones and some good thoughts on how to fix some problems. And so I definitely hear this posture of listening, of humility on the part of the leader, because you don't know who's going to come with the best idea, but just being ready to see what can work. And I really do appreciate the idea that you said that we can't be afraid to fail. I think it's interesting within the educational setting. It's almost kind of like we're failure averse.
Hmm. Right, we don't want to admit something's not working the best, right?
Yeah, yeah, it's the strangest thing, and maybe that's a topic for another time. But yeah, it's like but again, that willingness to try something and to say, man, you know what, we tried, we decided together. Let's put it in a Southernism. This ain't working.
Right. Yep. And when we want even our students to fail sometimes. Don't be afraid of it. My daughter, she tried out. She's in seventh grade. Sixth grade, tried out for volleyball team, made it.
Hmm.
Seventh grade, tried out for volleyball team, didn't make the team. So
Hmm.
so I said, okay, well, we didn't make it. how much practice did you put in prior to tryouts? Well, not much. Okay. So are we taking lessons ahead of time? No. Well, you're getting to that point now as a seventh grader where you've got kids who have been playing,
Yeah.
at,
Uh-huh.
third, fourth, fifth grade, sixth grade.
Uh-huh.
So we have to think about, okay, if you're going to try out next year, what are the odds that you make the team next year if you don't start putting in the work, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I was like, you got to figure out, kiddo, like, do you really want to play volleyball because next year? Because if you do, then your mom and I are going to get you those lessons. We're going to put
Yeah.
you in a position to where you succeed. But if you want to try out for volleyball next year and not put in that work ahead of time, then the likelihood is not going to be great that you make the team in eighth grade.
Yeah.
So I think that was just a really big aha moment for her of like, okay, from that failure in seventh grade of not making the team, if I want to make it in eighth grade, I'm going to have to start putting in the work. And so I was like, the choice is yours. If you do what I want to put this, in your hands. If you want to, play, then we'll figure out a way to get you those lessons and stuff. And so she said, yeah, like I want to do that. So we took her to get some of those lessons, and she's improved a ton. And I don't know if she's going to make it in eighth grade, but we're at least taking the steps to have that learning experience of, hey, this
Yeah.
is, I didn't make the team. This really stinks. So what are we going to need to do to make sure that that doesn't happen again?
It reminds me of I was listening to I think it was a podcaster or a commentator, one of them, and they were actually it was a former retired. It was a retired athlete who was talking about the difference between you know athletes at the elite level, and we've probably heard this before, right? There's at when you make it to the professional sports, it's literal degrees. I mean, like small degrees of separation between talent levels. And of course, you have some folks who are otherworldly. But how many times have you seen these otherworldly talents just kind of burn out because they thought it was just the talent and the ability alone? They never really put the time in to cultivate it, to set up their own system for success. And they were saying that they repeatedly see that you'll have guys that are really, really talented, but they're undisciplined.
Mhm. Yep.
And then you have guys who are not super duper talented, but they're disciplined and they make a career for themselves. They're playing in the league, 12, 15 years if it's basketball, 11 years if it's football, and if baseball. I mean, you play until they put you put you out to the pasture,
Right.
the bullpen, right?
Yes. Yes. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Go
So
ahead.
it's just one of those things where failure really can be a gift, and
Hmm.
we can't be afraid to say, hey, I tried something, it's not working, let's course correct, right? I mean, the Savannah Bananas, I mean, you just look at their success, and I mean, and they failed at first. I mean, the guy Jesse who owns the team, I mean, people in Savannah were booing them, when they find out that they're not, this AAA team anymore, and they're doing this thing called banana ball, right? And then they open up, the free food, right? And they had lines for 4 hours, and so they failed, right? But they learned at the same time from that failure to make it what it is now. Now they're playing in
Yeah.
NFL stadiums. The first time they did that, they didn't know how it was going to work, right? And
Yeah.
so there are multiple ways in which they failed. And so they said, the next time we're going to play in an NFL stadium, we know how to do it, right?
Right.
So I think just taking being vulnerable as a leader and saying, hey, like, I'm not going to get it right 100% of the time. I'm going to have to fail in order to figure out how to do things better. And I think that even as people who are following that leader, understanding and and being mindful that, hey, the person who in leadership is okay with failure, and they're doing the best that they can to support you,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
having that understanding that they're not out to get you, right? That
Yeah.
this person does want to support you ultimately.
Absolutely. And it all boils down to relationships. And so to kind of round out our time, I want to kind of go back to just really what you're doing right now and helping to support the teachers in the classroom. Obviously, you started FolioBridge because you recognize that the teachers were being required to do a lot of things. Things were not, fully automated.
Mhm.
There was a lot of friction that was
Yeah.
being created on the way to the teachers fulfilling their responsibilities. So, I just want to give you some time to talk a little bit about exactly what and elaborate a little bit more on what you're hoping to create and what you're hoping that FolioBridge solves or supports and for
Yeah.
teachers. Hmm.
So really is that organization piece, and it's creating this system where we can centralize communication, not just within the school, but within that greater network, right?
Yeah.
And so because one of the problems that we have is that because every school is independent, some
Hmm.
schools are Microsoft schools, some schools are Google
Hmm.
schools. So to get them all on the same platform is really challenging. And so I think what a lot of accreditation bodies have done is they have, a portal with
Hmm.
those resources and discussion boards. And I found that, those don't get utilized to the extent which we would really love them to be utilized for. And so my thought is we can break down some of those barriers and break down some of those friction points where it's not like, I have to go to this website to access these resources, right? I don't have to go to Clever or ClassLink, right? We can incorporate that all into the same
Hmm.
platform to where you're not having to go to so many different places to communicate and access your resources.
Yeah. What's been the response so far? I know you're in some early stages of what you're doing. What's been the response so far?
Yeah, so we're piloting right now at a couple schools, one in Fort Lauderdale, a
Uh-huh.
couple here in Tampa. And so the response has been really great. It's been so encouraging because, I've been doing this for the past year and a half, 2 years. And when you kind of, go into this entrepreneurial world of trying to create something out of nothing, you ride these waves of like, did I make the right decision? Is this what people really, really want? But it's having tons of conversations with people to figure out, okay, no, like this is a need, right? So if we
Yeah.
can create, better systems for communication within schools, I really feel like we can help with, that teacher retention,
Mhm.
problem where we can create more organized schools, better workflows,
Mm.
more automation, save people time, and when I was even thinking about this too, when it comes to accessing resources, we were paying, $3,500 a year for Adobe Photoshop, but it was really only,
Mm.
and every teacher had access to it, but there was really only one teacher that was using it. It was the yearbook teacher.
Mm.
Meanwhile, I had other teachers who were paying for Canva subscriptions, and maybe they just like Canva more, but Canva and Adobe Photoshop kind of work hand in hand. And I'm like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, like you don't have to pay for that. Like we already have Adobe Photoshop for you. You can use all these tools, and it's great. But the reason they did that was because they didn't know they had even access to it in the first
Interesting.
place.
Yeah.
Again, my failure, right? As
Mhm.
as a leader, I did not support my teachers in letting them know you have access to this awesome resource. And because all I did to let them know, I sent an email out in the beginning of the year. Hey,
Mm.
you have access to this. Here's your username and password. So,
Right.
and you know how busy the beginning of the school year is. Emails get
Right.
lost in translation.
Yeah.
So a lot of teachers didn't even realize they had access to it to begin with, and so I was basically wasting money because we were not using that resource to its fullest
Mhm.
extent, right?
Yeah.
And some people might say, well, yeah, I mean, we're using Clever or ClassLink for that, but how do people even know they have access to Clever and ClassLink, right?
Mhm.
So it's, hey, you come in and you bookmark it. So the idea is let's bring all those resources and all that communication in one spot rather than having to have them go to these resources.
Yeah.
You can bring all that communication and resources to them.
Absolutely, absolutely, man. This has been great, Nathan. To get you out of here, man. I mean, we've talked about a number of things, and just really the posture of the leader, having a listening posture, having a posture of humility, a willingness to fail. Any other practical advice or encouragement that you have for both, mainly for leaders, because the leaders are the ones who have a responsibility of supporting their teachers within their school, but also even for teachers as well. What encouragement, advice, practical tips do you have?
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite verses comes from James 1, right? When it talks about count it pure joy when you meet trials of various kinds because the testing of your faith produces perseverance. we're coming out of the February funk. I don't know what it is about February, but behaviors, for some reason, I don't know what it is. February behaviors go nuts.
Yeah.
So we're coming out of that, and we're getting into that last quarter of the year. We're in that home stretch, and so it's been a long year. I'm sure we're 3/4 of the way through, but just know that, hey, yeah, these are going. Being a teacher and being an educator is not an easy. It's not an easy gig, right? And I hear that all the time from when people would come from their work and they would come in and teach a classroom and tell people about their job, right? And they're like, "How do you do this? 7 or 8 times a day." And so people are tired, and when people get into the classroom, they kind of realize the challenges that it is to manage a classroom and to teach students. And so just know that that the testing of your faith does produce perseverance, and that you're going to come out better at the end of it, even though it's not fun going through some of these trials. You're going to come out better on the end, having if you have an open mind and you're humble about it and you're willing to say, I don't have it right all the time. I'm gonna failure is a gift, right? And to celebrate your wins when you get them, but also realize, okay, this didn't go right, and be humble and willing to accept the fact that you failed, and then just go from there. It's okay.
Awesome. I mean, I when I emailed you, I said, "Have you read that Scott Adams book?" He says, "No," and then I give you the title. He says, "But that seems like the book I should read." And so, oh my goodness! So it's been really good to talk to you, and just really appreciate your heart and your willingness to serve and to support teachers and leaders. So just want to put out to our listeners here at ACSI, please develop a relationship with Nathan. As you can see, he's just a brilliant thinker, very humble, and has a desire to serve school leaders. Nathan, thank you so much for joining the podcast.
Jerry, I appreciate you, and thank you so much for the time and opportunity.
Grafted Together is a presentation of the Association of Christian Schools International. Learn more about biblical worldview and spiritual formation at acsi.org/graftedtogether.